All righty.
Okay, well, welcome, Liz. It's so lovely of you to join me from South Africa. Can you believe it? What a world we're in. So, Liz, last week we talked a lot about the adaptive challenge of the pandemic, about how we move from crisis through to a sort of collaborative way of working. And what really struck me is we've spent a lot of time talking about sort of systems and processes, but not about the personal experience of this, of trying to lead through this. So what it means for us in our personal lives as we're trying to do our own work at home, as we're trying to manage our families, as we're trying to experience our own reaction to the pandemic. So whilst all the folk who are watching this are doing very difficult and very useful work and are hungry for how do we make sure that we have a better future out of this, I really want to talk to you a bit more about leadership starting with self. So this reflecting, I suppose, a little bit more on what we know about transitions. And that's why I asked you if you'd join us this week to maybe slow us down a bit and just take a bit more of that space. And Liz, obviously, we've known each other for some time, but you famously and fabulously introduced me to Otto Scharmer's work. And anybody that knows me now knows that ULAB is ingrained in every single program that we do. But I asked you particularly because you are so thoughtful and experienced around leadership practice. So thank you for joining us all the way from South Africa, and maybe you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit too.
Lovely. Thanks, Becky. And I'm delighted to be in the conversation with you. So thank you. I've been working in facilitation and leadership development I worked it out over, it's coming close to 25 years now. So that's quite a long time. And you mentioned this focus on leadership practice. It is my key interest, really. And I'm particularly interested in how we do learning in ways that help leaders to take cutting edge thinking and turn it not only into insight, but also into shifts in how we are and who we are. So my keen focus is really on the learning approaches that we use to build this kind of leadership practice.
And just a bit of context, how is South Africa?
How is South Africa not right now, or in the virus? And well, I'm losing track. Day 20 something of a lockdown, one of the most serious lockdowns in the world, the most stringent, I believe. So we're not able to leave our homes at all, except for essential supplies, medical care, that sort of thing. And I think what it is showing, our president has been superb, really calm, composed, compassionate. And he writes weekly in a blog, and one of his reflections today was around how the virus is really showing up our inequities in such stark reality. So there's huge challenges around poverty and around inequality, and how the virus is impacting communities differently. And not just the virus, but the lockdown as well.
Well, that's at one level, it's good to hear, having spent some time in South Africa where your leadership hasn't felt like it was bringing a country together. It felt like it was dividing it. And so I guess that the folks who are going to be watching this are very interested in this nature of community and how do we lead togetherness, and yet tackling some very difficult personal challenges. And I think that it's not just the trauma, I guess, of some of the decisions people are having to make, which are truly awful. Some of those very personal choices about how do I practice with or without PPE, those sorts of choices are very difficult, as well as some of the guilt people are feeling about being at home while others are doing the desperate need to contribute. And I think this sort of stuckness of the current is a real challenge for people who are used to busy and doing and knowing how the world works. And we know the world's always changing and we're always changing. But there is a sort of sense that we don't want the old world to come back, but also we want it to be settled. And yet we're going to, as always, be in a very changing and uncertain world. So I just wanted, Liz, just to hear your thoughts really about, from your experience, what do you draw on when you're trying to work through a period of such uncertainty as a leader?
So I think one of my personal practices through this time, and it's certainly something I encourage in the leaders that I work with, is this practice around curiosity. So at the same time as we're in it, there's enormous benefit in stepping back to get a meta perspective, to start to observe. And I'm particularly interested in observing ourselves in action. So observing myself, observing the responses, observing patterns. And I'm also using this personally as an opportunity to test the validity of beliefs I've long held around leadership. So the crisis is a fantastic crucible because it puts everything under scrutiny and under pressure. And so I've personally been stepping back to say, is this true? And one of the beliefs I've held as a cornerstone is that as leaders, we only have ourselves. We are it. We are the instrument of impact. And if that's true, then how we are and who we are matters as much as what we do. So it isn't just the actions that we take, but it's also about our state of being as we take them. And I see you're sharing the quote by Bill O'Brien, who actually is a leader who passed away some years ago, but a very successful, very thoughtful, impactful leader. And I often return to his words where he says, the impact of the intervention is dependent upon the internal condition of the intervener, that how we are and who we are really matters. And so I think our steadiness matters. So I've been tracking that in myself and also listening very carefully to the leaders I'm working with in different parts of the world. And I'm hearing a common thread that there are many moments of feeling overwhelmed, feeling distracted, feeling an emotional fatigue that sometimes shows up as inertia, a sort of there's so much I don't even know where to go, what to do, or what to focus on. And what I observed that what it does is it erodes our capacity for clarity and it erodes our capacity for compassion. So I think the work we can do on finding this internal steadiness really matters.
And how?
And so, yeah.
How do you do that? Because I absolutely recognize this. You know, listening to people, some saying, "I feel so unproductive. You know, why is everything taking so long?" Or, you know, I've sort of had it with politics, the public sector, and sort of disconnecting through to I'm just exhausted. I can't think. Just take something off me.
Yeah.
All of those are levels of distress with the uncertainty. So when you talk about finding your steadiness, what does that mean?
So for me, I think there's a lot of different pieces to it, but one of the cornerstones that I go to, and I certainly believe in very strongly as a leadership practice, is the practice of ease. And I derive that from Nancy Klein's work on the thinking environment, that one of the conditions we need to think well is ease. And we recognize that even outside of the COVID-19 crisis, the world is not easeful. So it's not an external state, it's an internal state. And Nancy describes it as ease as the freedom from internal urgency. So then what I'm interested in is other practices that can create that little bit of spaciousness so that we can arrive with some clarity. So things that I find helpful in that regard are definitely the reflective work, the kind of stepping back to get a meta view, meditation. And then I'm also a great believer in structure. So, I mean, I think you know this about me. I like structure. So I like structures that create freedoms, disciplines that create freedoms in ways. And I think one of the other things that I go to, and this goes to a quote by Otto around, I think, intention helps us in times of great uncertainty. So one of the pieces I've been returning to is to become very clear on my intention. And I have been framing a couple of questions I've asked of myself and of the leaders that I'm working with, which is the one question being, when you look back on this time, what do you want to be able to say?
Yeah.
What do you want to be able to say about who you have been in it, what use you've made of the time, how it's been, and so forth. So just looking back. And then also in times of transition, as we're in, there's opportunity to shape. So the second question I've been asking is, and how do you want to shape the new normal? What influence do you want to have on what things will look like on the other side of this? I find, yeah.
What you want
Sorry.
Do you want to share this next slide here?
Perhaps in a moment, because yeah, I think that's just really going to the piece on intention. That the clearer the intention, that with everything out of control around us, I can return to my intention as a point of grounding. So that was really about what creates ease.
So that's quite a challenge, Liz, because I mean that could feel like another pressure that I have to use this time well, and what does that mean? And I know that's definitely a pressure people are feeling.
Yeah.
They said, well, oh gosh, is it going to list it after 3 weeks? I know for some folks are going, gosh, 3 weeks, well, I've done all of this, but I haven't done all of this. And
yeah,
what have I got to show for 3 weeks? If there's another 3 weeks, what would, good for me look like?
And I guess my focus is less on what we would have achieved in the time, but who we will have been through it.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's like, how do I want to be with the frustrations and the uncertainties and the anxieties of this time, yeah, I suppose it's, so I turn it much more to the qualities of character.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
So I also observing myself, I think very particularly the sort of veering between rage about both the injustice, the folk who are probably suffering the most, other folk who will probably continue to suffer more as a result of what comes out of this economically. And so a frustration and rage about the inability of the system to respond, a rage that for me at the moment, some of the central teams, NHS England feels like it's hanging on so hard to the old ways that it's refusing to learn, where locally there are amazing and fantastic happening. So at one level that, and then at the other end, feeling up the need to be incredibly generous, tolerant, recognizing that everybody's going to find their own path through. And those two sit quite difficultly in the same space for me at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that's I mean, my personal thought on that is holding the spectrum, holding all of it. And that's I think that's the challenge, because I certainly see these multiple layers of response in myself and in other people, that it's frustration and then enormous awareness of the privilege of people with the resources that we have here, and so many people, so there are these multiple layers, and I guess it's holding a kind of a compassion with all of that, to say, okay, yes, and it's all of it.
I like we often talk about how you don't move into any relationship without thought, that you talk about having structures, and I suppose we also talk about design, the need to prepare, no matter what the conversation, whether the conversation's with friends or with family or with work or Zoom like this, whatever way we're doing it, that you don't I think it goes back to this sense of intent. You don't step into these conversations randomly. There has to be some level of purposefulness, both to your preparation for it and to how you want to be in it. And I think that's even more so, I think, when you're trying to do it in this way, because it's your attention has to be so much higher, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So then when we're thinking about this experience of life, and I think when I first talked to you, I said, some of us of a certain age have been through multiple transitions in our lives, hormonally, personally, work, you name it. You never got to the over 50 brigade without having transitioned in all sorts of ways. And this feels like it's another transitioning space. And so I just wanted to reflect with you, whilst we get caught in this sense of how am I now? How do I want to be now? Then I think there's also something about, so what am I going through? What does that feel like? And what can I expect from myself in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think aligned to my love of structure, I also like to have ways of understanding things. And one of the most helpful for me in terms of transition, and when I saw this, it's William Bridges' work on change and transition, and he differentiates change from transition in that change is the external, it's what's happening around us. Whilst transition is the internal process we follow to either prepare for change or to come to terms and metabolize the changes happening. And honestly, when I saw this, it was like, Oh, wow, that makes complete sense.
Hmm.
And I see it absolutely playing out here and now. So Bridget's idea is that there are 3 phases to transition, and unfortunately the 2-dimensional page doesn't reflect the messiness of this process, because it makes it look like it's linear, and it isn't. Because I think I'm observing that we're in all 3 of these simultaneously at the moment. But if we take them in just in the step-by-step fashion they're laid out, the first aspect of transition is about recognizing that something is ending or has ended. That if we are to actually really be able to step into what lies ahead, we really have to be able to end. And I think that's a big piece. What I see now is a lot of grief and loss, both at the level of people being lost, but also at the level of everything we have lost about how our lives used to be. And I think to do endings well, there is a real need to be able to acknowledge that, to reflect on it, to look at what's important that we want to be carrying forward, but also to grieve for what isn't with us anymore. So that's the ending phase. Bridges talks about the next phase is the neutral zone. I like to call it the messy middle, because it is messy. It's complete chaos. It's this time where everything's disintegrating and reintegrating. It's a state of flux. And because it's in flux, it's also the time when we have the most opportunity to shape things. It's also the time of greatest risk, because I think we're wired as human beings to move towards certainty. So uncertainty feels very threatening. We know that from a neuroscience perspective, and then we retreat into old behaviors, quite negative behaviors. Often territorialism, competition can rise here. And then only do we get to the new beginning of looking, really being able to invest our emotional energy, our practical energy in what this new state is, what everybody's talking about is the new normal. And I see all 3 of these running in parallel at the moment, that we're ending, we're grieving, there's this unbelievable uncertainty unfolding around us. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of work being done about, well, what's the possibility of this? Because we press pause on so much of how we do things, what could we bring into being now as we return to some notion of normal society? So yeah, that helps me when I think about it, because it also helps me to make sense of what feels like a very diverse range of emotion and response and reactivity. So when I've remembered this, it makes me go, okay, it's okay. That's it. I'm just in the messy middle. It's fine. It's fine.
I keep saying to myself as I'm raging, let go.
Yeah.
Breathe, let go. You can't control this. I want to, I can't. That's talking to yourself around. I think that's what you're saying about the messy middle and this. Everybody wants some level of control, and I think what you were saying at the beginning around just the structure of the day puts something in. The rise of, in this country, the rise of baking bread seems to be another way that people put some level of structure into their day. But finding what is it that gives you a sense of just being able to calm, I think.
Yeah.
And whether it is this mixture, isn't it, of being able to breathe and to let go and to be yourself and to be present right now, rather than letting your head race around all the time. But also just points in the day that you need in order to just ground yourself. So those pictures may be very important. I like this very much, because I think you could also just start thinking, where am I? What is this that's surfacing now? How does it relate to these? It's a very nice way of making sense, isn't it, of your emotion and your reaction, and how to be the person you want to be, as well as the person you want to be.
And also, I think it points to, what I understand about transition is we can't bypass any of these phases.
Yes.
I certainly observe some reluctance with endings. That I think one of the big insights I took out of this work was that as human beings, we don't resist what's new, we resist what we might lose.
Yes.
And so there's something about when we really need to deal with what has ended, what is ending, to grieve the losses, because otherwise we actually don't step into the new beginning well. And then this messy middle, I think we're all plunge deeply into it and have no way of avoiding the uncertainties. But there is often a tendency to rush to answers there because we don't like the lack of clarity, but the lack of clarity is an essential part of the transition. And right now we're being forced into it. Yeah.
What about where we're experiencing leaders who are holding off engaging with this transition, who are just waiting for the moment when they can reassert the power that they had, they can enjoy the luxury of the living that they had before, they are not up for letting go. That feels quite I know this is the real world, the rub up of different spaces, but how do we bring people with us along this? That's quite I think that's I think what strikes me with this, Liz, is some of the acknowledgement of what's going on. I think I watch people in meetings with these variety of emotions and maybe just beginning to name it, see what we're fearful about losing. I think there's a lot of fear in leaving things behind.
Huge. And one of the antidotes to, because I think what happens is when we get threatened emotionally, it's triggering the same sort of sense of physical threat. There you go, you're back. And one of the antidotes to that is genuine connection with other people. That we can generate safety through our interactions. We can generate safety if I know I really can trust you. We can be honest with each other, and we'll help each other. I think we generate some of the safety that's needed to be able to confront, because otherwise we do retreat into either holding back, holding off, disengaging. So I do believe one of the antidotes is in the relationship work you were talking about. How do we come into these conversations in ways that allow people to be honest?
So this is a non-judgmental space. It's recognizing where you are. It's just being conscious about yourself being the instrument. What you pay, you get more of what you pay attention to. Understanding, having some frameworks that might help you be generous and open about your relationship with others. Sticking with people throughout it all. But I love that final phase, which is also the hope and the possibility of the future. And certainly, what we're seeing emerging, whilst there is a lot of potential difficulty, we've got a lovely website, Liz, that we're just trying to capture the things that people want to stick. They don't want to let go of. We're also capturing the things people never want to see again. Because it's always good to know. As a bit of an after action review, but actually what people are saying about the things they want to stick are all relational. So I thought there'll be some of the techie stuff, but honestly, it's having identity and meaning. Somebody said it's so great to be back doing a ward round with people I know. I'm not all over the place. I'm in a team. I feel like I'm part of something. Through to we've been able to work very differently with our care homes. We've used the technology, but we've been able to have a different relationship with our care homes. We can check in much more frequently if we do it virtually. That means we can talk more often. We can see someone's progress better. So they were all, amazingly about how we best use our time in service to our population. And a lovely one was about somebody said, I have 800. We have things called shielded people. These are people who are supposed to be really sick if the virus gets them, they no chance whatsoever, apparently. And so they said, well, in 5 days, we'd galvanized hundreds of volunteers to our local community, all of whom rang every single person up. They have a new friend. And they said how rewarding it was for absolutely everybody involved. And that's phenomenal, isn't it? The attention to actually throughout all of this relationships is what we've got. And so I'm hoping that some folks who are listening here might be wanting to add some of the things that they absolutely want to keep. But it turns out at the end of the day, what we want to keep is each other. Which is a great way to potentially end our session.
Lovely.
So Liz,
thank you
so much. I just absolutely love the time I have with you. It reminds me absolutely about the value of really both reflection, of being true to self, of understanding yourself, but also cutting yourself a bit of slack at the same time. I appreciate it, Liz. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Becky.
And I'm just going to stop the recording.